morning. Today is Wednesday. It is Chof Beis Iyar. I'm sorry, Thursday.
See, that's
See?
like, that's it, 9-9.
Thursday, Chof Beis Iyar.
Anyone see the end of this one?
Tov Shin Daled. It's Teres Menach. We're on Teres Menachem Sefer Mamorim. Tov Shin Yidalef, Tov Shin Yid Beis. The Maimer of Shabbos Pashas B'Midbar. Mevorchem Achedesh, Erev Rosh Chodesh Sivan, Tov Shin Yid Beis. Mamar Chamisha Kinyanim. We're up to Ois Gimel. Am I right? Yeah. Page Reish Pei Daled at the bottom.
Yeah.
Just to recap and to further explain where we left off. The Mishnah says that Hashem acquired 5 acquisitions in His world, and He enumerates them as Torah, heavens and earth, Avraham, Israel, the Jewish people, meaning Israel, and the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. So the Rebbe asked a number of questions concerning this, and the crux of it is, what is this idea of Kinyan, that Hashem acquired these 5 things, and why in His world? So the Rebbe explains that the Rebbe explains the idea of Kinyan in terms of Olamis, realms, and he says Atzilus is in a state of Kinyan. First, the Rebbe explains what is the idea of Kinyan. The idea of a Kinyan is acquiring something. Acquiring something means basically that you're not actually changing that which you're acquiring. You're acquiring something that exists, and in the state that it exists, you're moving it from the domain of the seller to the domain of the buyer. You're moving it from the domain of one entity to the domain of another entity. Atzilis is in a state of Kinyan. In other words, I think the confusion at the end of last year was, when you say Kinyan, there is the function of the Kinyan. There's a Kinyan as a function, right? As a method by which to acquire something. That's what Kinyan means. But then there is, for example, a description. Kinyan could be a description of something. In other words, when you ask, this object that you have, how did it come to be yours? I acquired it. Kinyan, right? For example, when you say a gift, so you're not describing the method by which it was transferred from the person who gave it to you. It's a gift. It's something that was given. You're describing the object, right?
Now, it's a noun, not a verb.
Sorry?
It's a noun, not a verb.
Okay. Yeah. So when you say Kinyan, in reference to Atzilus, it means Atzilus comes into being in a mode of Kinyan. Not that Atzilus is the function of Kinyan which causes something to move from one place to another place. That's what Atzilus is. Kinyan describes what Atzilus is. Atzilus is basically revealing something which existed before. In other words,
Some words can't be a verb.
Correct, but Kinyan can.
How?
Because that's what it is. Kinyan could mean the actual function of the Kinyan. For example, Kesef is a Kinyan, money is a Kinyan, Shtar is a Kinyan, Meshicha is a Kinyan, there's Kinyan Agav, Kinyan Sudar, etc., etc. These are descriptions of Kinyanim, actual Kinyanim as a function, methods, as a method. But Kinyan can also could also describe the object. It is in the mode of a Kinyan. It exists as a Kinyan. It's an acquisition. Not to describe a tool which causes something to move from one domain to another domain, but rather to describe the object. Are you with me?
What is the root of Kinyan? The Shoresh.
Connect, to acquire.
Is it from Connect?
Yeah, Kono.
Connect.
Right. So it is to come, so it already is. Okay.
But basically the idea is this, irrespective of which aspect of the Kinyan we're referring to. The idea of acquiring something, acquisition. What is the idea of acquisition? Acquisition means moving something from one ownership to another ownership.
Okay.
Atzilus is that. Atzilus takes that which is concealed and reveals it. That's the whole function of Atzilus. There's nothing new in Atzilus. Whatever was concealed before is now in a state of revelation. That's Atzilus. Gilui. So it existed beyond Atzilus, and Atzilus. Now,
Why isn't every world like that? I understand.
one second. Why? So, what does it mean? It's revealed. So it's Getlichkeit. It's complete Getlichkeit. The other world, you have something new. There's this Chachas. Yesh. I mean, in Bria you have Nivroim, but
That's where the Kalim first appeared, in the Tzidus.
but in the Kalim he said, even the Kalim are alakus. What's Kalim in its source? It's God's power to limit. So before it was Behelim, and now it's Megilui. Before it was concealed, now it's revealed. In Bria, you already have something new. You have created beings. You don't have Yesh. We'll see about it. I'll talk about that later on. We have this expression "efshoros hamatzias," the possibility for existence, in the context of full-blown nivroim. But I don't want to go into that right now. I want to focus more on this idea of kinyan. From Bria and on, you already have something new, which Kaviyochel did not exist before. Where does the Yesh Ma'ayin aspect begin? Where you have this quantum leap, where you have something new. That's why it's called Yesh Ma'ayin. That's from Bria and on. In Atzilus, it's up until Atzilus and the end of Atzilus, it's Gili. You're revealing something, you're revealing the Lakus that was concealed before. Right?
Right.
So now, in Bria and on, Chamisha Kinyanim Kona Kodesh Baruch Hu Be'olami, in other words, where Atzilus exists to begin with in a state of Kinyan, in a state of just revealing that which was existed before. Where do you need to have an action, a function of Kinyan to cause something to actually move from one state to another state? That's from Bria and on. Because it exists first in another realm, Bria Tzir and Sir, in the sense that what? That it's not in a state of revelation. On the contrary, you have new existence, separate existence, as it were, and you have to reveal within that and lift it up to where? To Atzilus, to cause it to be in a state of Kinyan, in a state of revealing the Getlichkeit that's in it. Let's see how the Rebbe spells it out.
And is that how, when you go back to Pirkei Avos, when he said that they had 5 things, there was a Kinyan. This is the river, we're talking about that level of revelation.
We're talking about Bria and on.
Right.
Kona HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ba'olam Moi. Right? Kona HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem acquires, causes it to be acquired. To lift it up to Atzilus, basically. How? We'll see soon. But first the Rebbe gives, articulates the idea of Kinyan. Chapter 3 at the bottom of Reish Pedal. This whole idea will be understood from the concept of Kinyan down here below. What is the concept of a Kinyan? The Kinyan through which the object moves from the domain of the seller to the domain of the buyer. The Hinei, Yesh Beze Fane Kinyan. There are 2 modes of acquisition, of Kinyan, of the tool called Kinyan by which you acquire something. Mishicha, drawing the object into your domain physically, V'kesef, and the exchange of money from the seller to the buyer. And concerning Kinyan, there is a dispute between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Do we need both, or is one sufficient? Rish Lakish holds Meshichim B'Foreshes Min HaTorah. Rish Lakish holds that the tool of a Kinyan, known as Meshicha, drawing the object into your domain, is explicit in the Torah. That's as far as the biblical function of Kinyan is concerned. When the buyer draws the object into his domain, it becomes his. Now, why do I have to pay? Why does the buyer have to pay money? Through the fact that the buyer drew it into his domain, he then becomes obligated. He has a debt. He owes the seller the value of that which he drew into his domain. On the other hand, Rabbi Yochanan holds that so far as the Torah is concerned, the exchange of money causes the object to be acquired by the buyer. That even just by handing over the money, the object has already been acquired by the buyer. And nevertheless, midrabanan by Mashiach, the Chachamim came along and said they obligated him also, they required him also to draw the object into his domain. Which means that, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the Chachamim say that although Minatayra, so far as the biblical position is concerned, the money has already caused the object now to come into the ownership of the buyer. Nevertheless, the sages said that he doesn't acquire the object until he will draw it into his domain. The Gemara over there discusses why, because it could be a situation where, for example, the seller sells wheat, and the buyer will pay for the wheat, but he leaves it stored in the seller's attic, and then the fire breaks out, and the seller says, "I'm very sorry, it got burnt." So the Chachamim said it should not be transferred to the ownership of the buyer until there is actually Mashiach drawing it. Why? So long as he hasn't drawn it into his domain, it still belongs to the buyer. So that if a fire does break out, for example, or anything that could harm it, he will work very hard to make sure that it remains intact. Otherwise, he could be a little less motivated to do so. What is the difference between these two positions? That when the Rebbe is going to explain that when you draw the object, what happens? You show by drawing the object that it comes into your domain. You're actually moving it into your domain. Whereas when there's an exchange of money, the object hasn't even moved yet. It could remain in the domain of the seller, and nevertheless it still belongs to you, right? The Rebbe is going to explain that. We'll continue tomorrow.